One final question here. In all this, how do we continue to do our jobs under the Lord with this person's asked with a smile on my face when I'm physically tired and in pain? But let me expand that to when we look at the moment we're in. It's discouraging in many respects. Some people might say this isn't the America I grew up in. How do you soldier on? How do you continue to maintain the joy of the Lord?
Recognize the America you grew up in was the odd thing. Most of human history has been really tough, right? For most people all over the globe, all the time. 95% of it has just been a hard grind. And we were extraordinarily blessed in the generation that's in our rearview mirror. Extraordinarily blessed. And we wadded it up and threw it away.
Yep.
So ain't no one to blame but ourselves on that one. And so just recognize that we're just, I would say something like, welcome to Earth, kid.
When I am tempted in this way, and I am, I'm especially tempted when I think about my grandchildren and what they're going to be facing. That's what makes things really serious for me. And when I think about that, I cannot help but think of that incident in the hiding place. I'm so glad I did get to visit. Ever visited Amsterdam and Holland? I forget which city it was. Anyways, where the...
I've been to the airport.
You've been to the airport. Okay, good. But I put my head inside the hiding place, and I've walked up those stairs and that. And if you've not read The Hiding Place, you're really missing something. But it's the story of the 10 booms during World War II, and the sisters were in Ravensbrück concentration camp. And they were put in this horrible, horrible dormitory that was filled with fleas. Everything was infested with fleas. And Betsy, the sister who passed away, had always said, in all things, give thanks to the Lord. And so she stops to pray and give thanks for them being put in this place that is infested with fleas. And what ended up happening was they ended up being able to have Bible studies with the inmates because it was the only dormitory the guards would not go into because of the fleas. And it took time for her to see this. But the point was, by being obedient to that command and seeking that joy, they experienced things that no one else could ever experience. So we've been given that opportunity, and the question is whether we'll avail ourselves of it or not. And so Christ is still on his throne, and we have it better than most of the humanity has ever had. And every time I start feeling depressed, I just start thinking about 1347. 1347. You don't remember 1347? 1347 to 1351. Over half of Europe died. That was a real plague, okay? That was the real one. I mean, that's where you could get, there were forms of the plague that you could get that killed you in 12 hours. 12 hours. They thought you even passed it by looking at people because it was so fast. And can you imagine, in some cities it was over 70%. In this countryside, maybe 33 in some places. But can you imagine what it was like back then? And yet all the good things that hadn't happened yet? So that's the thing to keep in mind, is that we've still got it really, really good. The Lord's still really good to us, and everything we've got we didn't deserve in the first place. So be joyful.
And whatever's coming 5 years from now, let's say you paint it pretty dark. We were made for that hour.
That's right. His grace is sufficient.
I think it's one of the things that's interesting to look at, like the various plagues of the 14th century and the 16th century, because one of the things you learn when you read your history is it's like, in the Marine Corps they always said you run towards the sound of fire, but in church history the Christians always ran towards the plague. It was the Christians that went in. I remember worshiping at a church in England, and as well as also some of the characters in my dissertation and reading about their names on these plaques, or these names and these stories, and there are these great ministers who had incredible congregations, a huge writing ministry, and many of them died in the plague because they heard the plague was over there and it's their job to go and minister to the plague. And that's what the faith is for.
And in regards to church, Calvin loved that French congregation in Strasbourg so much that when the plague hit, he did not flee. He stayed and he ministered And I think he got sick, if I recall correctly, but recovered. But he didn't run because he loved that congregation so much.
Amen. We'll give these gentlemen another hand of